Call to order the closed session meeting. The time is 5 o'clock. City Clerk, can you do a roll call?
Councilmember Duncan?
Here.
Councilmember Gardner?
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable?
Here.
Absent from tonight's meeting is Mayor Bieber.
My speaker's not on, guys.
Any public comment?
No, it is.
No comments.
All right, we'll go to closed session.
All right, thank you.
Time is 5 o'clock.
How many slips do you have? A lot? No? Good. Good for you. Hey, don't let these guys get out of control.
You guys ready?
Yep.
I'd like to open the regular City Council Assessors Housing Authority meeting on June 24th, 2024. The time is 6 p.m. Can I ask Megan Wolf to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Megan. Can I ask the City Clerk for a roll call, please?
Councilmember Duncan,
Here.
Councilmember Garner,
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
Here.
Absent from tonight's meeting is Mayor Beaver.
City Attorney, is there anything to report on closed session?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem. There are no reportable actions at a closed session today.
City Manager, is there any changes to the agenda?
No changes, sir.
Proclamation of Park and Recreation Month. Megan Wolf.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. My name is Megan Wolf. I get the honor of being the Director of Community Services for the Community Services Department of the City of Yucaipa. And I am here today to present a proclamation to the City Council that makes Parks and Recreation Month is the month of July. And this proclamation talks about the importance of parks and recreation, how it builds community, it helps promote relationships, the use of our parks. And if anybody else would like further details on the parks proclamation here, they can come anytime down to City Hall and read it. But I'd like to present that to council this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we come up and take a picture? All right. Public safety update. Kevin Walker.
Mayor Pro Tem, Council, I'll be presenting on the April and May public safety update for the police department. As you can see, for April and May, we did have a slight reduction in the calls for service, down from 4,500 to 4,200, and last month, just over 4,000 calls for May. We are still maintaining about a 5-minute average for our emergency calls, which include things like traffic collisions, stabbings, shootings, things of that nature. For our Part 1 crimes for April, we had no homicides, rapes, or robberies. We had 18 aggravated assaults, 7 burglaries, 12 thefts, and 4 motor vehicle thefts. For May, we also had no homicides, no rapes. We did have 3 robberies, 30 aggravated assaults, 13 burglaries, 22 thefts, 8 motor vehicle thefts, and 2 arsons. And for arrests in April, we had 109 arrests, of which 74 adult bookings were taken to our correctional facilities. In May, we had a pretty substantial rise in arrests. We had 144 with 104 being booked at our correctional facilities. And as with most months, our most common arrests were narcotic-related warrants and domestic violence and thefts. As far as our traffic unit, they issued 272 citations in the month of April and 277 in May. We did have 42 collisions in April, 28 in May, so we had a pretty significant reduction there. We did 75 extra patrols in problem areas. Anytime we have like a round table, or if we have people come into the station, they bring up areas that they may want to see additional enforcement in, so then we'll focus our traffic units in that area. And we did have 4 DUI arrests in April, along with 9 in May. And as far as our solution-oriented policing team, this is kind of combined together. They had made 166 contacts with 43 transient calls for service. 23 subjects accepted some form of assistance, whether this is transportation somewhere to the Windsor Center to receive resources. We did have 82 arrests with 21 citations and 6 towed vehicles. The SOP team conducted 304 business contacts, park patrols, and property checks. The big thing is our red tagged residences within the city. We have established a list of all these residences, and the SOP team is making almost daily contact at all of these to make sure there are no transients that have broken in and are staying inside. And they have had 5 targeted SOP operations where we put additional bodies out there to offer resources and make sure that we can do what we can for them. And that concludes this report, unless you have any questions.
Nope. Any questions?
No question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Council. I'm Mayor Pro Tem. So this will be the same thing, our April, May report for the fire department. So for April, we ran about 720 calls for service, which equated to about 11% increase over March and about a 10% increase over April the same time last year. So getting busy. Then May again, we jump up to about 756 calls for service, about 5% increase over April and about 5% increase over May of last year. So just keep climbing there. Average response times were just over 6 minutes, so we have seen some better responsiveness with the ambulance service, just kind of hit and miss on what's available. Some significant incidents we had, structure fire off Maplewood, structure fire off California Street, Hidden Village Mobile Home Park, and then I went out as a strike team leader on a fire assignment to Santa Barbara County, the Hill Fire, and ended up running the operations for the fire for the night shift. One that we didn't post in here that you guys have seen was the arson we had throughout the city that we made an arrest on. So CAL FIRE, San Bernardino Law Enforcement, along with Office State Fire Marshal, our CAL FIRE folks, made the arson arrest, and they're pursuing that for court case. Some paramedic standby we offered was our Music and Arts Festival. So not only do we staff that for outreach, we also staff that for the safety of our citizens. With thousands of people there, we have paramedic staff there, and we had a couple calls for service on that. And then the rodeo, we're obviously staffed for the public, and then the contestants as well need a paramedic standby. So we were glad to do that. Some projects we're working on. So Confire EMS is moving forward smoothly. It's kind of the last update we got. Ambulances are being produced weekly, and we're looking at an October 1st start date, and everything's lining up for that. So that's good. Also working on our, the state has been basically generating us our own electronic patient care reporting program at no cost to us, which is a good thing, that we'll have the data here instead of having it at, offsite with the county or something like that. Continued hazard fuel reduction, as far as chipping projects, thinning projects, we keep working on that. And we did apply for a wildfire reduction community, and it wasn't really lining up with the state. Our hazard mitigation didn't get reviewed until after the deadline. So that's something we're still working towards. We will be very ready to submit the next time it goes around. But in the meantime, we're going to do a lot of outreach on our Firewise communities, which are the same designation, just in a smaller geographic area. So we did promote Michael Clark. He was one of our fire engineers at Crafton Station, and being a large contract with 12,000 employees, we don't necessarily get control over keeping people within the city, but we were able to promote him from Crafton to the relief shift. So he works at all the stations 1 day a week, which was good. Also, we graduated 2 paramedic students from Victor Valley College. So just a reminder, each one of these paramedic students is 600 volunteered hours by the preceptors. But that's our next workforce. So it's good to give back, and then we end up hiring these folks. A lot of outreach events for April, May, since it's 2 months. So we had the local Boy Scouts come do a station tour. So it's all recruiting for us. We gave them all job applications. I don't care if they're 10, but it's fine. They'll come back. We were able to do Earth Day with the school district, and then take a hike with our open trails and open space. Guys got out there. We try to get out there regularly, but seems like we get pulled in a lot of different directions. We also did the career fair at Crafton Hills College. You can see the cadets over here. So we are legitimately handing out job applications there, getting them to be Yucaipa Reserve firefighters, CAL FIRE firefighters back into the system. We did have our developmentally disabled adults come through and kind of get the same tour as everybody else. And they got to spray some water, have some fun. And then just some of the other outreach, we didn't want to kill you with pictures, but every 15 minutes through law enforcement and fire department was a big success. That's kind of how I got into the fire service, actually. We helped host forester and fire wardens in Oak Glen, and then a safe swim event, taught pool rescue, some sidewalk CPR for that. And then same thing as we did last year, the CAL FIRE, our union, was able to sponsor, the main sponsor for the boys high school golf tournament. So they were able to donate $5,000 to host that tournament for the boys golf team. So glad they were able to do that. That's all I have for you, unless you have any questions.
When was the special needs day for the fire department?
I'd have to get a date for you on that. I wasn't at that event.
Okay.
So I'll get you the info on it, though.
Yeah, my little cousin has Downs.
Yep.
I think that you met her.
Well, those are your stations, so they're always welcome to come to the fire station. They don't need anything special. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yep.
Any questions?
No.
Code enforcement? Ben Mountain.
Thank you, city council members and Mayor Pro Tem. Have the code enforcement stats for April and May of this year. For April, we did receive 138 new cases, and 76 of them were resolved before the end of the month. A lot of the cases as part of that is at the end of spring, as we got a lot of overgrown vegetation, so it's helping with our fire department on managing that. And then nuisances and unpermitted construction kind of rounded up the top 3 for that. And then in terms of inspections, code officers completed 325 different inspections, resulting in 97 total citations. The city did receive $17,951 in citation fees. This includes the normal citation fees that we get, but also because we use a collections agency, they went through the franchise tax board as they do every year. And so that reflects that number as well as part of that annual process. And then did inspect all the different chicken ranches, and no violations were observed with that. And then in the following month, we received reports of 148 new cases, and 85 of them were resolved before the end of the month. Top cases, again, continues to be the overgrown vegetation and the nuisances, and then we received a number of things of unpermitted construction, as well as some parking violations. So you can see some large structures that were kind of parked. This one is in the public right of way, but there was another one across the street in the actual street, kind of blocking the flow of traffic. One of the things that we have also recently begun is we have a door hanger for kind of smaller cases. So if someone reports something to code enforcement and it's like, hey, it's a pretty easy fix, rather than sending a formal mail notice, we have a little door hanger, put it on it. And so code enforcement has noted that that's been a pretty positive response. People have been pretty easy to work on resolving it. So before it actually becomes a full-on case and they're getting full-on correspondence, it's something to kind of help get at least, hey, we observed something, it's easy to fix, let's coordinate on it. And so they've been working on that. And then as part of the month of May, we did have 325 different inspections, resulting in 147 total citations, and received $6,100 in citation fees. Again, did complete inspections at all the different chicken ranches, and no violations have been observed. Certainly as we went from the cooler months and the rain, that's usually when you see kind of the fly outbreaks at the different ranches, and luckily it's been pretty mild. So happy with that, and that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. If not, that's my presentation.
Any questions?
That one photo you had of those office buildings over right off of Bryant, were they trying to sell those in their front yard? Is that what they were doing?
They, I believe, were. It was kind of a mismatch of just stuff showing up, and we were getting a lot of calls, and so it was resolved pretty quickly, but yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Public comment. City clerk's going to call your name up, and please keep it down to 3 minutes and have respect for us and as well as the city staff. I appreciate it.
We're going to start off with Martha Glubka, followed by Kathy Sellers.
Good evening, gentlemen. Let me grab my thing here, then you can time me. Okay. I'm not even sure where to begin in regard to where our city is and headed with our expenditures and the financial crisis that we are headed into. After attending last Monday's meeting and listening to the rhetoric and repeated intimidations put out to the public about where to cut costs in our budget, I walked away shaking my head. There seemed to be so many inconsistencies in much of what was being said. Back to the citizens in the audience. Allowing Mr. Mann to put his take on so much of what was said by the audience participants was just that. It felt like a spin. I do hope that the council had the common sense needed to actually listen and hear how this was being spun. When I asked about the $4 million loan to a private citizen bordering Five Winds Ranch, Mr. Mann stated that the city's investment in the LEAF program historically brought in a very low return to the city. So in doing a 3-year loan with the option to buy the land at 7% return was a win to the city. He also stated that picking at expenditures or staffing decisions was not what brought us to today's deficit. Really, is that what we're going to convince the people of? We are in debt, so let's use the money we don't have and gamble it on land acquisitions and see if we can improve the debt we already have. Then the topics of increasing staff and salaries was explored. Mr. Mann told us he had recruited an employee last year and he was promised a $40,000 increase in salary this year if he'd come on board. Well, I say to you, why did we recruit him when you knew our budget was broke and then promise such a pay raise this year if he came on board? Who gives you the right to make such a debt when the money is not there to begin with? He also said when he looked at the budget, there really was not a lot of fluff in the budget. By my calculations, that's fluff. I think everybody has seen this. This is another example of fluff. The public service scare tactic announcement sent to the citizens this week. I checked with Staples, asked the cost to print this. I was quoted $4 a copy, double-sided, with thick, glossy paper for mailing. This does not include postage. We need to steal your checkbook and lock it up. Best estimate I could come up with on census was approximately 19,000 households in Yucaipa, which would equal $76,000 just for printing, and then the postage on top of that. Chris, you told us that the role of city manager was being treasurer as well, so this is on you, so own it. When cannabis dispensaries were discussed, Mayor Beaver was asked if there was a correlation between the rise of public safety and spending. Mayor, sorry he's not here, but you immediately said, yup, and immediately Chris Mann interrupted you and put his spin on it, saying, not necessarily. I say to you, council, where have your voices gone? Are we to believe our leaders have lost their voices and allowed him to come in and sell us his agenda only? We trust you, our city council, to be the leaders we need to make positive improvements to Yucaipa, but not this way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Sellers, followed by Mary Reuter.
Hello, Kathy Sellers, District 1. Councilman Duncan, we heard you when you said you didn't want to be recalled and it didn't make any sense because you're up for re-election in November anyway. We agree and decided not to spend the time, effort, and resources in your district. We did gather quite a few signatures, however, and there are several people interested in running for election in District 3. Councilman Garner, we collected 66% more signatures on the recall petition than you got in votes. You will be recalled in November. The overwhelming response we got from people is they are very angry and want several council members replaced. I've been having some startling conversations with several people lately, including the past president of the Canyon Lake Property Owners Association, Renee Griffiths, and the past vice president of the POA. While there are two sides to every story, there are some alarming parallels with our two cities. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to come to the conclusion that our city has been mismanaged over the last 18 months. Certainly, there is room for some disagreement for past decisions by other city leaders, but it is disingenuous to claim that Bobby Duncan, who has served for over 12 years, and Justin Beaver, who has more than 4 years in, didn't see this coming. Step up or stop playing the blame game. Mayor Beaver, you assured us over a year ago that the city manager will not control the council. You have let us down. His idea to spend money to make money has cost us dearly. We aren't broke, we have a budget deficit and are spending more than we make, so are dipping into historic savings to cover our bills. That needs to stop. The expensive glossy flyers that were mailed out last week as a scare tactic appear to be a grooming tool by a political operative so that citizens will vote to approve a 1.5% tax, or else we will lose deputies and close fire departments. That kind of ploy is insulting but expected. The fact that we're being asked to sacrifice to help solve the budget crisis at the same time that you're all voting on raising wages tonight for city employees is astonishing. One new recruit is being awarded $40,000. 2 weeks ago in closed session, there were 4 items of litigation to discuss. Tonight, there are 2. On another closed session, there were 5 items of litigation to be discussed with council. Oh, wait. That's from June 2nd, 2021 for the City Council's meeting in Canyon Lake while Chris Mann, Steve Graham, and Anna Saceda were at Canyon Lake. Do you all see a pattern here? Never in the history of Yucaipa has the city been in litigation with their citizens like they have over the past 18 months. That's alarming. It feels like the circus tents have been picked up and moved from Canyon Lake to Yucaipa and business as usual. When a clown seats himself on the throne, he doesn't become a king. The kingdom becomes a circus.
Thank you.
Well, hello, gentlemen. I'm Mary Reuter.
Excuse me. Did you call?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't hear you.
That's okay. All right, I am Mary Reuter, and tonight I am not speaking as a private citizen. I am speaking as a representative from the Board of Directors for the Yucaipa Valley Chamber of Commerce. So I have 2 things to say to y'all, to share with y'all. First of all, the Chamber wants to give you an update on the Uptown Friday Night Market. In the past years that the Chamber was hosting this event, it started the weekend following the Music and Arts Festival. We appreciate the support we received from the city and from the council, and our intent was to reestablish Uptown Friday nights this summer. Sometimes obtaining the signatures on permits and all the necessary logistics takes a long time to process, and we are past the dates when we plan to begin. With that being said, the Chamber Board has made a decision to hold the event from January 2005 through September, so we are extending it. This will give us time to get everything done and to establish a wonderful event that will make our city proud. That's the first thing. The second thing, the Yucaipa Valley Chamber of Commerce is comprised of a diverse group of businesses who may or may not always agree with every council decision and every city program and expenditure. But every single one of us is in business here in Yucaipa, and the city's economy has a direct impact on our business success. The Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors is happy to be working closely with city officials in this time of fiscal crisis. We are aware that the budget deficit is a result of decisions and circumstances over many years, not just a consequence of staff changes and the last election. We appreciate the efforts toward transparency and the willingness of our city leaders, the council, and our officials to face the slings and arrows to ensure that the citizens are heard and informed. The Chamber trusts that the council and city officials have the skills and the experience necessary to manage this challenge and make the difficult decisions for the benefit of the entire community, rather than acquiesce to groups of individuals who may not understand the complexities of city governance. The Chamber of Commerce will continue to work with city leaders to promote current and future business enterprises and ensure the solvency of our city. We pledge our support, and we thank each of you for your service.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have Hanson Wong.
A promotional thing first. Anyway, as you can see, the Firecracker Run is going to be on the 4th of July. And the Healthy Yucaipa Committee, the city is working with the Yucaipa Fire Department in order to accomplish this run. It starts at 7:15, and we invite all the families, kids, strollers, and so on to participate. The reason it's starting early is to keep it cool. And since this is taking away from my time, you start at the clock already, I better get started on the other part, unless you're willing to restart me. Okay, so I think discussing the special council meeting that was put on to discuss the finances, it seems to me that the communication timelines could be improved. We have opportunity to do it better. The only thing I saw in the news, and I realized it was on the Yucaipa website and so on, but a lot of people don't read that as much as, say, the news and possibly the Facebook, although a lot of people don't do that either. But the only thing in the News Mirror was only for the week before the meeting, and I don't think that the city understood that News Mirror doesn't always get to people until the Monday of the special meeting or the Tuesday after. And therefore, even if it got there Saturday, most people plan whatever they were going to do on Monday, not realizing about the special meeting. So I think that's a problem. Since you had the flyer you were sending out anyway, why not have sent the flyer out early inviting people to the meeting so that people can see the flyer, understand that it's something to do with the budget, and come to the meeting? It seems like the perception is that you didn't want the people at the meeting. There was a very low attendance, and so I think there could be quite a bit of improvement made as far as the communications are concerned, so the citizens would have adequate time to hear the proposals and also adequate ability to give their input to the city council so that you can decide, the direction to go. So again, I would propose to the city to have better and sooner communications with the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
We have no more public comments.
All right, thank you. Now to the consent agenda. Items 1 through 13. Ask any of the council members, would you want to remove any?
No.
No, I need to recuse myself on item 12.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll go to a vote.
I'll move approval of the consent agenda, items 1 through 12. Is that what it is?
13.
13. 1 through 13.
I'll second.
So we got Councilman Duncan I'm sorry.
Hey, you're doing great.
And John Thorpe to second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
And we'll note Councilmember Garner's recusal on item 12.
Okay. Sorry. All right. We'll call up the presenters of the following items. Mr. White. Items number 14.
Item number 14, Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council. It is my pleasure to introduce item 14. This has to do with the salary schedules that accompany the annual budget. There are two in that. Last year, we did create a human resources division at the city. To present this item, I do have our human resources manager, Courtney McCrae.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. So as Phil mentioned, we're going to be discussing the salary schedules that were included with the budget proposal that was presented to you on the 10th. And additionally, it was discussed a little bit further last week. This item right here is specifically just related to the full-time salaries and benefits. So of the budget that was adopted on the 10th, about $14 million of that was salary and benefit costs. Of that $14 million, about 11.5 was related specifically to our regular full-time employees. And of that 14 million, or I'm sorry, the 11.5 million, that's about 4.6% or 4.6 million in our support staff, and then 6.9 million in the non-support staff. So in that 6.9 million, those are departments like community services and development services where there's some level of cost recovery, whether it be through grants, fees, project billings, things like that. And the direct impact to the general fund is 3.6 million in the support staff and 6 million in the non-support staff. So on the salary schedules, there's 4 key areas to highlight. The first area is the labor negotiations. These were already negotiated last spring. The agreements went into place or took place in July, and these were already agreed upon between the employee groups and the council. In those negotiations, there was an increased cost of living adjustment that goes into effect July of 2024 with 4.4% increase. It's important to note that of this, there are 2 employee groups. There's the general employee group and the management, supervisory, and confidential. This does not include any part-time employees. The part-time employees are excluded from any of our labor negotiations. While these have already been agreed upon by the council and the labor groups, it is important to note that the salary schedules do require a resolution to adopt the new rates every year, hence why we're bringing these via resolution. The next item, which has been discussed pretty substantially at last week's meeting, is the AB 1484, Assembly Bill 1484, which Governor Newsom assigned in October of 2023. This bill states that temporary employees who perform the same or similar type of work that is being performed by any of our permanent employees who are in a union are entitled to the same bargain for conditions of employment. So that means all of the benefits that our full-time employees are currently entitled to. Of the city's part-time employees or the temporary part-time employees, the only classification that falls into this category would be our maintenance workers. most of our other employees are community services staff, and they don't perform any of the same functions of our full-time employees. So of the part-time employees, the maintenance workers, these gentlemen are typically doing the same thing as our full-time employees, just on a lesser scale and with slightly more supervision and less hours. The maintenance staff are the individuals that are out there maintaining our roads, the potholes, the parks, the trash pickup, playground repairs, and facility repairs. So essentially eliminating any of these positions that we currently have on staff from the part-time staff would be contradicting the council goal of trying to improve our road maintenance. So we're trying to not go that route if we can avoid it. So the city's solution to this issue with the AB 1484 is to eliminate the temporary part-time maintenance worker classification and reallocate some of the positions to a full-time position, which we're calling an assistant maintenance worker. So it's at a lower level of any of our current maintenance workers. So currently and historically, the staff or the part-time staff typically consists of anywhere from 4 to 7 part-time maintenance workers. With this new bill that went into place, the potential cost for rolling any of those 7 employees into full benefits would be about $440,000. Whereas the cost of just creating 3 assistant maintenance workers would be approximately $200,000. So by eliminating the 7 part-time maintenance workers and creating 3 full-time, we're potentially saving about $240,000 by going this route. In addition to that, we're going to have 2.5 of these 3 positions be funded by the gas tax. So they're actually going to be focused more on the road maintenance. So there's really only a half position that's going to be affecting the general fund out of these costs. And with the creation of this new position, we're also looking to create one additional that's going to be dedicated specifically to the Five Winds Ranch and El Dorado Park. In this current fiscal year, we increased our city's landscape contract to include scope to cover just specifically El Dorado and Five Winds Ranch. The scope of that contract is about $94,000. So with creating this new position, they will handle all of the landscape maintenance up at the park, and they will also be available Thursday through Sunday while there's camping taking place at the park. So we'll have staff on site to assist with any needs that arise with the campers. So overall, the cost savings just with this position would be about $27,000. And then the other major change is a handful of vacant positions that we currently have. So in the budget, we have 5 positions that are vacant but not budgeted. So they exist on the salary schedule, but they're not included in the budget. This is our Director of Community Development, a Code Enforcement Supervisor, a Systems Analyst, a Network Support Specialist, and a Public Works Ranger. There's also 2 positions that are vacant that we decided to eliminate from the salary schedule, one being a Community Services Coordinator and the other Community Services Specialist. And in addition, there is one recently vacated accounting manager position that we've decided to reallocate to a flexible position. So we will be able to hire this position in at a lower level of a supervisor rather than manager, with the potential for reallocating back to a manager level in the future if the budget and staffing levels arise. So overall, the proposed changes that we have on these resolutions would allow the city to operate with little to no service level cuts, would meet the contractual obligations that we have to the employee groups, and hopefully be the most financially, fiscally responsible decisions that we can go about. This concludes my report, and I'm available for any questions that this council might have. I have other staff on hand too, in case you have any questions about the assistant maintenance workers positions. Ramin can probably weigh in on that.
Any questions? Bobby?
I have a comment. So because of the AB 1484,
Yes.
the liberal policies of Sacramento, we were going to put 3 temporary workers out of a job, but through the creative processing and thinking of staff, only a half a person's out of a job.
Correct.
Correct.
And now they get benefits.
I think that's beautiful.
Question I had for you, it seems like we have a little bit more information on this staff report than the last one, so is it the same? Or did we revisit it and make some tweaks since the last meeting?
There have been no tweaks to the resolution. We just provided additional detail in the staff report.
There's a lot more information in this one, I appreciate it. Maybe it was just me, but I feel like I understood this one a lot better.
I agree. The other one, it got mixed in with the budget report, so there wasn't a whole lot of area to add in all this detail. I mean, we could have, but just the primary focus on that one was budget. We didn't anticipate as much focus on the salary resolutions.
Thank you. I have one other comment, and this is directed more to you, Mr. City Manager. I'm not trying to be a jerk in how I word this, so take it for the right heart, okay? But when you go out and recruit people, you have that responsibility of hiring people and whatnot for the city. That's not necessarily our responsibility up here. However, when you promise salaries that may not already be in existence on the schedule, you do tend to put the council at a little bit of a disadvantage when we're trying to maybe make the right decisions. And you feel, or you have made a promise, one way or another, to a future employee that may or may not be something that the council is able to agree on. So in a nice manner, I would like to request that maybe we reform from doing that in such that manner that it puts the council in a predicament. So then it doesn't look like you're not holding your word, but at the same time, kind of, in a way, putting us in a spot where we don't have a choice other than to do it. And then it kind of hurts our reputation with the public.
Understood. A couple points of clarification. So this particular employee came from a city where he had the title of management analyst already. He was recruited into a management analyst position to replace an employee who had left the city with that title of management analyst. This employee was making pretty close to the top of the top step that we offer here previous to coming. And so at that time, the council last year had already approved the budget and the salary schedule. So his request of making a little bit more money than he was making before, which is fairly common, most people want to do that. I couldn't do that without going back to the council and redoing the salary schedule or creating a different step for him. So the discussion with him at that time was, listen, this is where we are right now. Next year, I will recommend to the council in the salary schedule and ask the council to approve the position of senior management analyst. He did understand that that would be subject to approval by the city council, so it wasn't so much of a promise as my promise was to present it and ask for that from the council. I will say someone who spoke this evening from the public mentioned a $40,000 raise. That is inaccurate. This establishes a senior management analyst position with a different salary range. He's currently at the top of our management analyst range. He's topped out, so he would be going into that new range, somewhere in that range, which would be, and I'll ask Courtney, is it about a 5% or so increase from that he would be going into? I don't know if you have that.
Typically with reallocations, we do a 5% increase if an individual moves from one position to another. So in this case, going from the management analyst, he would go to 5% above whatever rate he's currently at as he gets reallocated to a new level.
So then in future years, he would have the ability to continue moving up the salary, the steps of the salary range for that new position. But it's not a $40,000 increase in 1 year. That's inaccurate. But to answer your question, yes, I am careful never to commit the city council to anything. It is absolutely at your discretion. My promise to him was that I would recommend it to the council and present it in the new salary schedule.
Thank you, sir.
Is that it? That's it for me. Mr. Gardner? All right, we come to a vote.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, we do have one public comment on this item.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Mr. Hanson Wong. Dr. Hanson Wong, excuse me.
Just Hanson is fine. We'd like to welcome Ms. McCrae to our organization as the HR person. She'll keep me on the straight and narrow because HR is very difficult to deal with. Also condolences because it comes at a time of a bad budget, okay? I'm sorry I turned away from the mic, but, you know, got to address the young lady. So we knew for over a year that we were having budgetary problems according to our city manager and city staff. And so, again, I still am not sure of the considerations of advancing positions and so on. I don't like to see anyone lose a job. I don't like to see people not get a raise, but they're telling me that it's such dire straits at this time that if this sales tax doesn't go through, we're going to have to make a lot of hard choices. And so it seems to me that if you convert part-time people into full-time people, then again, it is more difficult, especially since they will be union people, to alter that later on. You're assuming that this tax increase will go through, so it seems like, okay, if you're going to remove the part-time people anyway, why not remove it, and then in November, after you get the taxes passed, and then you can hire and so on. But if you hire now, then you're adding to the problem that we have as far as I can see. Again, like the $40,000 that Mr. Mann said that wasn't really there and was inaccurate, and it was only approximately a 5% raise from the different statuses of the particular person. I haven't heard, again, of any comments regarding the comment at the last meeting of a 30% increase in salary and benefits over the last couple of years. And I thought that our mayor at that time found that it was true. And again, in a difficult budgetary time, there must be some accountability for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
We have no further comments.
Further comment? We take a vote?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Before we take a vote. This is probably directed more towards the city attorney. Can we vote to approve the schedule to take care of the legal obligations that we have, but not fill those positions until a later date to see how this tax initiative budget thing plays out towards the end of the year?
So if the city council wanted to adopt the resolution, but include in that a directive to the city manager to not fill any particular position, essentially put a hiring freeze on the positions, that is certainly within the purview of the city council. Is that your question?
That was my question. Thank you.
All right.
So that would be my motion, if I was gonna make a motion now, is that we approve the legality portion that we need to approve, so that we're not legally in a bind, but freeze those positions until we figure out what's going on with our tax initiative and our budget. Because that's gonna happen later in the year.
Okay. Mr. Duncan?
So,
What are you
sorry.
looking for from me?
Sorry, council member, before I forget, my recommendation is that that motion specifically state the job classifications that you want the hiring freeze for. And if you don't know the classifications off the top of your head, I'm sure we can ask our HR to help us out.
I'll let her say them so that I don't mess them up, but it's gonna be those temporary to full-time positions.
Yep, so it'll be the 4 assistant maintenance worker positions.
For assistant maintenance worker. Sorry, Councilmember Duncan, for interrupting.
We're voting on resolution 5 and 6 of the budget, right? That's all we're talking about right now, resolution 5 and 6? Because everything else was approved last meeting.
Right, you're adopting the two resolutions that were not approved at the last regular city council meeting.
Mr. Thorpe is asking for us to freeze the hiring of the maintenance workers. Adopt both, 5 and 6?
So if I could clarify,
Go ahead.
just so I understand what's being asked. Councilman Thorpe, are you asking that we freeze those four public works positions and also hold off on eliminating the 7 temporary positions? Because if so, if the idea is to both eliminate those 7 positions and freeze hiring the 4, that's going to put public works really in a bind, right? So if the idea is to hold off on making that change, keep the 7 temporary employees, but don't hire the new 4 employees. I guess 2 things to understand. One, but, we actually save money by making those changes, but also we remain at risk of the Employees Association triggering the new law, in which case, we could incur significant costs, I think over $400,000 worth of costs in benefits and salary that have to be added.
So let me ask you this then. So if we approve that and it goes through, we approve it, and then we get down to the end of the year and the tax measure does not go, what kind of recourse could we have at that point? Because my concern is, and the public's voiced it, is that I understand that we'll be in a bind with our service levels and we're trying to accomplish here in the city, but we might be putting our cart in front of our horse a little bit because we don't know what the outcome's gonna be.
Correct, and I think as with all positions, if we get to the end of the year, a sales tax measure is not approved, we're gonna be looking at cuts and reductions in every department in the city, from our sheriff and police contracts to our community services operations to our development services operations to public works. I mean, really across the board if we get to that point.
So we could revisit this, maybe in a little different manner, but we could revisit this at that time.
Yes, sir.
May I also add to, so any full-time employees that we bring on, as long as they're not at will, which is typically just management and directors, have to go through a 1-year probationary period where the city or the employee can sever the employment relationship at any point in time. So if we were to bring on new individuals in a regular position, we technically have a full year probation to where if they would be the first that we could cut if things did need to get cut staffing wise.
I don't agree with Councilman Thorpe at all. I'd like to make a different motion if this motion fails.
If I could add a little bit more context as well. Dr. Wong, as always, makes excellent points. It deals with a strategy. There's multiple strategies in dealing with the deficit. As we were working towards how we fix this long term, the key point of our strategy was maintain service levels. As we did that across the board. This is an example of we have opportunities as we work through details. How are we going to approach this? How are we going to approach that? Our constant across what we had been presenting to you in the budget was our plan is to maintain service levels, communicate the cost, get all that information out there, and then work with the community on long-term, how do we fix this? As we went through this specific item, we did the cost analysis. We also funded 2.5 of the 3 positions through gas tax, which is not part of that structural deficit. It's a separate fund, separate funding source. And so that half FTE is what's included in the $7.3 million structural deficit that you've been hearing about. The other 2.5%, 2.5 FTEs are in the gas tax fund, which is separate as part of that. A lot of information, but the key is as a strategy, Dr. Wong's suggestion was one strategy. That's not the strategy we followed. We followed the strategy of holding service levels and figuring it out where we go. If we don't get to where we want to go, there's going to be much broader questions across the board as to how to unwind recurring costs. So I did want to add that to the discussion as well.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll probably be criticized for it, but I'll retract my motion. If we're something we can revisit down the road, I'm concerned. It seems like in some aspects, some of these things related to the budget, and sometimes we're putting the cart in front of the horse a couple of times. And I understand this bit of maintaining service levels. However, we're asking the public to pay more taxes. So at some point, it was said the other night in our study session that, they want to see that we're doing our part as well. So that is a concern of mine. And I will withdraw it for now, but it doesn't mean that I won't bring it up later.
I don't understand this. So we're pounding our staff right now with their salaries and their increases. And our overall cost to the budget with our staff is 9%. And our fire and police is 63% of our budget. The problem is not our staff. The problem is safety, public safety. That's the problem as far as our budget is concerned. I mean, it's not a problem. It's just an issue that we have to deal with. This issue's been around for a long time. It's just been growing. But to haggle over 7 employees part-time, 3 employees full-time, and to haggle over that, which represents 9% of the budget, in my opinion, is futile. The issue here is if we don't get more money based on what we've proposed to do, then we've got a real problem. It will affect not only our staff, it will affect fire and police. It'll affect everybody. So if we're going to cut or talk about cutting 3 part-timers or 7 part-timers, and if we're going to do that, I mean, that's not going to, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what our problem is. Our problem is that public safety is high. And so we need to raise more revenue. And I don't think we need to talk about cutting anything until we decide if we can do that. If we can raise revenue, this problem goes away, I think, or at least it becomes easier to deal with. So I'm not going to vote. I make a motion that we approve items, Resolution 5 and 6, as presented by staff. That's my motion. But we need to vote, I guess we need to vote on his motion first. I don't know.
No.
No, if you had listened, I actually said I withdrew it.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay. Of course, I can't hear much anymore, so.
All right, so individual, are we going now?
Well, we have a motion on the floor. We need a second before we can take a vote.
I'll make the second.
We got a motion from Mr. Duncan and a second from Mr. Thorpe. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Ayes have it, 3-1. All right, let's go to number 15, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. There is a lot of information here to present, so please bear with me, but this is a very important topic, and all of this is important information to get out. When I delivered our annual budget to you last year, just 3 months into my job as city manager, I shared that the city was operating in a structural deficit and had been doing so since 2019. This situation is approximately 15 years in the making, and the city attempted to address the problem by proposing a sales tax measure in 2020. However, following the failure of that measure, the city did not take action at that time to correct course by establishing other significant revenue streams and/or making meaningful cuts in spending. Thus, the problem has grown worse over time. Operating in a structural deficit is unsustainable, and we must develop a long-term solution to avoid eventual insolvency. A return to structural balance will require additional revenue, cost-cutting measures, or a combination of the two. Due to the size of the deficit and the already lean city staffing, there is no way to solve the problem through spending cuts alone without cutting deeply into public safety services. Public safety is by far the largest portion of the city's budget. Our contracts for police and fire services are projected to cost the city $23 million next fiscal year. 63% of the city's general fund goes to public safety, whereas the net cost of all non-public safety city staff is only 9% of the budget. If we're to solve the deficit through cuts alone, there is simply not enough meat on the bone to get us there in any area other than public safety. That being said, if we are forced to cut public safety, there will need to be cuts throughout the organization, and service levels across the board will be impacted. Yucaipa remains committed to ensuring our community continues to be a safe and desirable place to live, do business, and raise a family. But if sufficient additional revenues are not established, then significant cuts to public safety, road maintenance, parks, programming for youth and seniors, and other services that enable our high quality of life will be unavoidable. Service reductions are particularly concerning in the area of public health, safety, and emergency response. In an emergency, seconds count. Approximately 80% of calls to the City of Yucaipa Fire Department are for medical emergencies, such as heart attacks, strokes, and car accidents. Without additional funding, the city will have to close one of our 3 fire stations and reduce firefighters and paramedics by approximately 30%. This is especially concerning given that the resources are already spread thin, and we currently have a need to expand emergency medical response. For example, the addition of a paramedic squad. With just 2 fire stations serving 55,000 residents, spread out over 28 square miles. Average response times will be significantly longer. Additional funds would help to ensure our first responders have the staffing and life-saving equipment they need to respond quickly and effectively, saving lives and protecting property. Last year, there were over 700 robberies, burglaries, and thefts, including 2 auto thefts in Yucaipa. Without additional funding, the city will have no choice but to cut the number of patrol deputies in our police services contract. This will impact recently implemented programs such as the Solutions-Oriented Policing Team and the Saturation Operations, which have been successfully decreasing the number of homeless individuals on our streets, shutting down known drug houses, and reducing homeless and drug-related crimes throughout the city. Without additional revenue, we may no longer have the staffing for these programs to continue. Without additional funding, the city will have to reduce community services programming, eliminating most programs that do not generate enough revenue to cover their own costs, which would lead to the elimination of many of our youth and senior programs. This will force us to close the community swimming pool, the senior center, and perhaps a number of our parks, scale back programming at the Yucaipa Performing Arts Center, and reduce or eliminate festivals and celebrations such as the Music and Arts Festival and 4th of July fireworks. As we discussed in depth during our special town hall meeting on June 17th, we are now facing a $7.3 million deficit in the upcoming fiscal year. This deficit is a result of significant investments in infrastructure beginning in about 2008. For example, drainage basins, the YPAC, parks, the police station, fire station 3, etc. Unrealized revenue expectations, for example, commercial development that has not materialized at the level predicted, and rising costs that have accumulated over time for everything from materials and labor to our contracts for police and fire services, all amid increased demand for services citywide as our population has grown. Using limited reserves to balance our long-term budget and service needs is not sustainable, and the time to make difficult decisions is now. With decisions of this magnitude, the city wants to engage the community in a robust dialogue so we can identify and prioritize the services that are most important to residents. The city recently worked with the professional polling firm FM3 to conduct a resident survey to identify the community's top priorities. Not surprisingly, police, fire, and paramedic response, street repair, and services for youth and seniors topped the list. Another component of our public engagement is the recently launched Financial Fixer tool, an interactive online tool that puts residents in the driver's seat to develop a long-term solution to close our structural deficit. Residents can use this tool to view different scenarios involving cutting services and/or raising revenue to protect critical services. Initial feedback from the tool reinforces what the polling company found, and attendees of our June 17th meeting shared the same message: protect public safety at all costs. The results of our polling and of the conversation with the community at the June 17th town hall meeting seem to indicate that a sales tax measure may be the most widely acceptable solution to avoiding cuts to public safety and other desired services. In order to prevent cuts to critical city services that include, among other things, police protection, fire and paramedic response, and services for youth and seniors, staff has prepared for City Council consideration a ballot measure for the November election to establish a city sales tax of either 1% or 1.5%, depending on which direction the council chooses. The additional sales tax will not apply to many of the necessities upon which people rely, such as food, prescriptions, or services. The city sales tax consultant, HDL, has reported that the estimated revenue for a 1% measure is $6 million per year, and for a 1.5% measure, $9 million per year. A notable consideration is that state law places a cap on total sales tax of 9.25%. It is higher in other counties that have specific legislation that raise their caps. The current sales tax rate in San Bernardino County is 7.75%, which includes the statewide base sales tax of 7.25% and the half-cent Measure I transportation tax administered by the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, or SBCTA, that was originally enacted by voters countywide in 1989. Of this 7.75%, only 1% of sales tax occurring within city limits flows to the city of Yucaipa. SBCTA has indicated that they will intend to seek an increase of Measure I sales tax in 2026. So it is likely that the cap will be reached, and Yucaipa residents will end up paying the sales tax anyway. Passing a city sales tax now, thus reserving that cap space for Yucaipa, will preserve our ability to keep sales tax dollars local instead of sending our money throughout the entire county. Should Yucaipa voters pass a city sales tax, the The proposed measure requires the establishment of an oversight committee to ensure the proper usage of the funds generated. In addition, once structural balance is reached, it will be critical that the city avoids entering into structural deficit again in the future. To that end, the Finance Department will work on a long-term financial plan for the council's consideration, which will tie future spending increases to revenue growth. Attached are two resolutions to place the measure on the ballot. Resolution number 2024-38, which would be a 1% tax, or Resolution 2024-39, which would be the 1.5% tax, are the principal resolutions which call for the election and place the measure on the November 5th, 2024 ballot. Resolution number 2024-40 sets deadlines and rules for how and when interested persons may submit arguments for or against the proposed tax measure. Additionally, resolution number 2024-41 states the City Council's intent to spend the proceeds of the tax revenue to avoid cuts to public safety services. Also attached is resolution number 2024-42, which directs staff to pursue significant and unavoidable cost-cutting measures should the sales tax fail to pass on the November ballot. Operating in a deficit is not sustainable. If the community is not successful in resolving the deficit with new revenues, deep organizational-wide cuts would be required to bring structural balance to the budget. The city has contemplated that scenario and is preparing to act accordingly. The operating budgetary deficit in the general fund and public safety fund combined in fiscal year 25 is $7.3 million. We're estimating that by January, the continuing trend will push the deficit to $8 million. We have identified service level cuts of $8 million citywide. Resolution 2024-42, directing the city manager to execute the cost-cutting plan should the sales tax measure fail, is attached to this report and includes Exhibit A, the cost-cutting list by service line. Cost-cutting measures would include closing one of the city's 3 fire stations, specifically Station 2, located on Yucaipa Boulevard, and eliminating from our contract with CAL FIRE all firefighter positions currently assigned to that station, saving an estimated $2 million annually. Reducing the cost of our contract with San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department by $2 million, primarily through the elimination of sheriff's deputy positions, estimated to be between 5 and 7 patrol deputy positions. Closing the senior center, saving an estimated $300,000 annually. Closing the 7th Street pool, saving an estimated $300,000 annually. Reducing YPAC programming that does not achieve full cost recovery, saving an estimated $250,000 annually. Reducing community center programming that does not achieve full cost recovery, saving an estimated $250,000 annually. Identifying additional cuts to community services programming of $900,000. Identifying cuts of $1 million in net costs of development services. Identifying cuts of $1 million in net costs of support services. These cost-cutting measures identified above include freezing of any vacant, non-critical positions, and negotiating any combination of furloughs and/or layoffs with Yucaipa City Employees Association. It is important to note that costs are tracked by activity, so service level cost cuts are also presented by activity. The estimates are primarily comprised of staff reductions. For example, closing the doors of a fire station does not save $2 million. The savings come from not staffing the closed station. The support function continuously reorganizes based on the service levels it is supporting. As such, the cost cuts to be determined will be achieved based on remaining service levels. It's important to note also that without sufficient additional revenues, it is likely that additional service level cuts will be required in fiscal year 26, as public safety costs are expected to rise significantly over the next couple of years. At this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to our polling consultant, FM3, who is joining us virtually, and after they're done, I'll pick it back up.
Good evening. I wonder if you can switch a slide, please. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dr. Richard Bernard. I'm a partner at FM3 Research, and I want to thank the mayor and the board members or the council members for inviting me to present the results of your resident survey. Next slide, please. We conducted the survey between May 8th and the 15th of this year. It was a dual mode survey, which means a random portion of respondents took the survey on the phone, and a random portion took the survey online. In fact, 51% took the survey on phone and the balance online. We interviewed a random sample of 405 City of Yucaipa registered voters who are likely to vote in a November 2024 election based on their past voter history, or if they've recently registered to vote, it implies there's some interest in the upcoming November election. For questions asked of everyone, and I'll remind you through this presentation, the margin of error is plus or minus 4.9. In some circumstances during the survey, we had very long lists of questions, and we didn't want to overwhelm your voters. And so a random half the sample was selected to hear some items and another random half to hear others. There, the margin of error was larger, a little less than 7. We contacted your voters by telephone, email, and text, and we provided the survey in English and Spanish. And if you're very quick on math and notice something doesn't quite equal 100%, I blame that entirely on rounding. Next slide, please. I want to start by giving you sort of a sense of the mood of the community and some background information before we get to the ballot question. Next slide, please. We asked them in order, first the city and then their neighborhood, if they thought things were headed in the right direction or if they felt things were off on the wrong track. About 1 in every 2 said things in the city were headed in the right direction, with a little more than a third saying wrong track. Comparatively to the numbers I'm seeing these days across California, and particularly in Southern California and Inland Empire, these are actually really good numbers. I'm seeing much lower numbers in a lot of communities in terms of the right direction. And so there's a much more favorable view than unfavorable view of the direction of the city. Consistent with all the research I've done in the past, when we ask about they're closer to their neighborhoods, people have a much more favorable view. And here you have 6 in 10 saying the direction of their neighborhood is going in a good way, 2-to-1 ratio of right direction to wrong track. Next slide, please. We asked them also whether they had a favorable or unfavorable opinion about Yucaipa city government. And close to 6 in 10 said that they had favorable opinions, with about a third saying unfavorable opinions. At a time when using the word government doesn't sort of relish very strong favorable opinions, these are, again, relatively good numbers to be receiving. Next slide, please. And before I get to the ballot question, we wanted to ask a conceptual question. Do they even think there is a need for additional funds to provide the level of city services that Yucaipa residents need and want? You could see 61% say there's at least some need for additional funds. Now, since my charge was to examine the viability of a general purpose 50+1 measure, seeing numbers that are beyond the margin of error in the high 50s and above are sort of good indications that something might be viable. My one concern is that the great need is relatively modest. Only 2 in 10 thinks there's a great need. So part of the task of the city, I mean, you certainly, as I've been watching, have communicated it clearly tonight that there is a great need for additional funds, but that message has to be spread more broadly. Next slide, please. And now one more slide. We worked with your legal counsel and drafted a potential general purpose sales tax. I understand ultimately at the end of the day it will be in your hands as to whether you move forward with it and how it will be written in conjunction with legal counsel. But I'm sure you can appreciate I had to ask something. So we worked with your staff to identify some of the major elements that are important to your sort of city agenda, your vision for the future. And since it's a general purpose measure, all we can do is describe some illustrative examples of how the money can be spent. As you'll note, a significant percentage of this ballot question focuses on public safety, since I believe I heard that approximately 63% of your budget goes to public safety. It seems appropriate, but since it can't be a dedicated measure, we've also included some other elements that are important in your community. We asked the initial question was a 1.5 cent transaction and use tax, also known as a sales tax. And as was mentioned before, your finance folks, HDL, informed us that it should generate about $9 million annually for a 1.5 cent. So we read it to them if they were on the phone, or they read it if they were online. And we said, if there were an election today, next slide, please. Would you vote yes in favor or no to oppose? If they said they would vote yes in favor, we asked them, is that definitely or probably? Because we want to know the intensity, the percentage of folks who say definitely yes. And if they said no, we asked them, is that definitely or probably no? Because we want to know the intensity of the opposition. That is the percentage who say definitely no, I'm not voting for this, at least on the initial ask. If they were undecided, we pushed them a little. We said, well, would you lean yes or would you lean no? If they said they'd lean yes, we put them in the yes camp, no in the no camp. And for this particular measure, 6% said that they were still undecided and they needed to learn more. So on a initial ask, with just hearing the ballot title and summary that you just saw a moment ago, 1 in every 2 said they would vote yes, 44% no, 6 were undecided. If we look a little bit deeper at the numbers, that 25% definitely yes is extremely low for a 50+1 measure on a initial ask for a ballot question. The definitely no, you'll notice, is a little bit higher, a little bit more than 3 in 10 are saying they will not vote for it. And I will remind you, opponents to this measure only need 50% and supporters need 50+1. If I use that margin of error test, and I'm very sort of, I assume everything will go in the direction of the measure. That includes the soft lean yeses, which doesn't always happen. If I use that margin of error, let's say 5 for simple math, I take that 50% yes, I add 5 to it. On the high end, it's 55. On the low end, it's 45 for that initial vote. Next slide, please. We then wanted to focus a little bit to get a little bit of clarity on your voters' priorities. So next slide. We gave them a little brief description of kind of what's going on in your city. We say by law, cities in California are required to balance their budget. If this measure does not pass, the city will have to make cuts to city services. I'm going to mention some of the services that cities provide that could be reduced, the city provides that could be reduced, knowing that some services will have to be cut if this measure does not pass. After you hear each one, please tell me whether you think large cuts should be made, some cuts, or no cuts. And I will get to the answer to those in a moment, but I want to show the next slide, which is, next slide, please, which is sort of bigger buckets. We wanted to know what their priorities were with respect to cuts. And we asked them, we gave them services, and we said, if this measure does not pass, what would your top priority be to protect funding from funding cuts? The blue is the first priority, the orange is the second. We've aggregated the total first and second priority, and as you can see, and you'll see in a moment with that demonstration of cuts, no cuts, or some cuts that I mentioned a moment ago, that public safety in the form of police, fire, paramedics, and 911 emergency services is the top priority for your voters. You have 2/3 saying it's their first or second priority. Next, followed by that, is the street maintenance and pothole repair. A little bit more than 1/3 do not want any cuts to those particular items. Next slide, please. And now in the subsequent list, and there are a number of slides, here is where we ask them, and the yellow is no cuts, the orange is some cuts, the blue are large cuts, and the green, they don't know enough to offer an opinion. I've ranked these series of slides by the yellow, the percentage they say who say no cuts. Of the 29 items, 5 of them are in the 80s in terms of folks saying, I don't want any cuts to these items. And you'll notice it's very clear they are all public safety related in various forms, including the number of fire stations. And if I correctly heard The city manager, he mentioned that if a potential measure or no revenue is found, that one of the cuts will be closing one of the fire stations, among a number of other cuts that he had mentioned before as well. You'll note the next item after public safety is street and pothole repair and keeping public areas, parks, and safe and clean, and protecting local drinking water through the nexus with storm drain management. Next slide. And I'm just gonna, you have this now, and this is a public document. You'll see as we go down the list, you see sizable majorities of folks do not want these cuts. Youth and school programs, school crossing guards, senior programs, open space, natural protection, and the like. And then the final slide. And then you'll see the final items there. There's less than a majority, but still in some cases a plurality who feel like they would prefer no cuts. So certainly, in general, your public is not excited about the potential for cuts, particularly around public safety. Next item, please. Next slide. And now, next slide. I wanted to simulate some educational outreach. As you know, the city cannot advocate what you folks on the dais do in your own time. You can certainly do whatever you'd like, but by law, the city can't advocate. All they can do is educate. So we presented them with a number of educational statements. These were randomized, and by the way, so is the list I presented previously. After each one, we said, tell me if it would make you more inclined to vote yes on the measure, to support it. If they said they would vote yes, we asked them is much more inclined, which is the blue, or somewhat more inclined, which is the orange. I've aggregated the total more inclined to support the measure on the right-hand side. And the words in the parentheses, property crime, 911 response, accountability, are just themes of the messages, so you don't have me read all 12 of them, but they are provided for you and the public. So this is just a theme. We didn't read it to them, nor did they read it if they were online. But the balance of the statements were read to them. And clearly, the public safety related statements really resonated with your community above that 50+1 and above the margin of error threshold. Of course, accountability is critically important to any measure, particularly, frankly, in your city, where people are fiscally prudent and want to make sure that their money is being well spent. I will tell you that people don't vote for a measure because there's accountability, but they will vote against the measure if there isn't any. And if we can go to the next slide, you'll see some more public safeties, quality of life message as well. Next slide, please. And then some other messages that didn't score as well, but still meet the 50% threshold. And then next slide, the final list of statements, some of them were just a little bit below the 50% threshold. Next slide. After we told them what illustrative examples could be cut, your services, programs, infrastructure, maintenance that could be cut if funding is not found, and also telling your story in a non-advocacy way, we reread that ballot question that you saw earlier, and we asked them, now that you know more information, how would you vote? On the left-hand panel is the half-cent sales tax. I'll remind you, it will generate approximately $9 million. And there, the vote was 60% yes, 33% no, 7% were undecided. The 60% overall is above the margin of error of that threshold, 50+1. But that definitely, yes, is still kind of modest. We like to generally see it in the 40s. Now, we asked the folks after they heard the 1.5-cent sales tax, what happens if this was, rather than a 1.5, a 1-cent sales tax that would generate $6 million? And we re-asked the ballot question, and their support goes up another 5 points. But look at the definitely yes. It's in a very, very healthy position at 47%, and your definitely no is only at 21%. Next slide, please. And of course, no measure gets a free ride, and that would certainly be true in your city as well. And so we provided some critical statements to see the impact of some opposition in your community. And that we read statements that are included in this paragraph about the cost of living and taxes being too high, and this is not the time to raise taxes, that the revenue that you need can be done by cutting waste and efficiency. We hear about that in every government entity, not specifically yours, and to get developers to pay their more of their fair share. And that if this passes, Yucaipa will have one of the highest sales taxes in the region. And finally, the city doesn't need the money because you always balance your budget. Now, up until earlier in the survey, many of the folks didn't ever know that by law you are forced to balance your budget, but nonetheless, you do balance your budget. And you do, and some would argue you have a healthy reserve. Next slide. So giving them some critical statements by potential opponents of this measure, we re-asked that 1.5 cent sales tax. Again, I'll remind you, it would generate $9 million. And this time, support is at 45% yes, 47 no, 5% undecided. This is just at best at the margin of error, but that would mean everything would have to go in the direction of the 1.5 cent sales tax. And that definitely is just too low for success. We don't tend to see general purpose measures on a final vote at 26% definitely yes being successful. We re-asked that 1 cent so that you had an option, you hopefully would have an option in which to deliberate as you are planning to tonight. And their support went up, the same people went up 6 points to 51%. That definitely yes, it's still modest. And note the definitely yes and the definitely no statistically are the same. So everyone's kind of competing for that 50+1 from the yes and the no side. Next slide, and this is sort of the conclusions, our recommendation. Clearly, the city and the services it provides are well considered. People like the city, they like what you're doing. 6 in 10 believe that you have some need for additional funds, but it was a modest, only 20% that really understand where you are in terms of your fiscal status. Moreover, less than 10% would be willing to make cuts to any of the public safeties elements that we had talked about, and clearly that makes up the bulk of your budget. And if I correctly understand, and someone will correct me for certain, if I correctly understand, there's no way getting out of a hole if a potential revenue measure or some way of getting revenue does not happen without cutting public safety. However, generalized unhappiness around government, a state trend, and this demonstrates there's a concern about putting a 1.5 measure onto the ballot. The consulting team recommends if you're going to put anything on the ballot, that it would be a 1 cent measure to address safety and community service priorities, as a 1.5 cent rate does not appear viable through this survey. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you for your patience.
How many people did you survey?
405.
405.
Correct, and it's we made sure that the demographics of the respondents mirror the demographics of your likely November voters. So the percentage of different ethnicities, age, gender, party registration, so that it is a representative sample of your population of interest.
Any questions? No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So according to the polling, it looks like 1% might be pretty viable. The polling firm is suggesting that 1.5% is probably not viable. For a moment, I'd like to address some chatter that has been going on social media since we've begun this discussion publicly, primarily surrounding the causes and the timing of the structural deficit. I feel the need to correct the record by emphasizing that the deficit situation we are now facing was inherited by the majority of this city council and by this city manager. The numbers we're looking at, which clearly show the spending down of tens of millions of dollars of city reserves on the building of infrastructure projects over the past 15 years, and the drastic cost increases related to our contracts for police and fire services and across the board due to inflation, are not my numbers, or even the numbers of our current finance director, but are taken directly from the official audited financial reports from each year. These reports were prepared by previous administrations and independent auditors and are available on the transparency portal of the city's website. To drive home the point, let's listen to the words of a former city manager from 4 years ago.
Hi, my name is Ray Casey. I'm the city manager of the city of Yucaipa. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who have attended the city's community outreach efforts regarding Measure E, which, as you undoubtedly know, appears on the March 3rd ballot, and to encourage everyone in Yucaipa to cast your vote. By now, most of you are aware of the fact that the city's paramedic program, which provides 911 emergency services to Yucaipa residents, has been operating in the red for the past 4 years. In addition, based on recent contract changes with represented employees, the Sheriff's Department costs are rising at a faster rate than the city's revenues. During these last 4 years, the city has done everything in its power to avoid having to make cutbacks in these critical emergency services, thus keeping the present level of 911 services in place. During these 4 years, the city has been able to maintain the same levels of service in our paramedic program by using the savings from previous years when the paramedic assessment revenues did exceed expenses, and by drawing down the city's structural fund balance, as well as making some other cuts. Unfortunately, the time has come when this is no longer possible to keep these same levels of service into the future without additional funding. This is the reality that city officials are presently facing, and the reason Measure E has been placed on the local ballot. I want to thank those of you who have shared your thoughts, opinions, and concerns with city officials by providing feedback through social media platforms such as Facebook, Nextdoor, Twitter, Instagram, and through emails. This feedback is truly appreciated. Based upon this feedback, it appears there are few, if any, residents who disagree with the need to maintain these high levels of 911 emergency services that are presently being provided through both the city's paramedic program and the Sheriff's Department. However, it seems the biggest concern that did surface has to do with the funding mechanism that city officials ultimately chose for making the city's public safety budget imbalance whole. We've made a concerted effort to respond to the concern and to explain the rationale that underlies the decision to address this critical situation through a modest increase in the city's sales tax. I assure you, this decision did not come easy. It came only after city officials invested a great deal of study, thought, and effort, including reaching out to members of the community to get citizen input. Most of you undoubtedly now have a clear understanding of the issues surrounding Measure E, so I would just like to take this time to once again thank you for taking an interest in keeping Yucaipa a wonderful place to reside, and to say if you haven't done so yet, please vote on March 3rd. Your vote certainly does matter.
So yeah, Mr. Casey was right. 4 years ago, this problem was 4 years in the making, right? So let me repeat, this deficit was many years in the making. It is a result of significant investments in infrastructure beginning in about 2008, for example, drainage basins, the YPAC, parks, the police station, fire station 3, et cetera. Unrealized revenue expectations, that is commercial development that has not materialized at the levels predicted, and rising costs that have accumulated over time for everything from materials and labor to our contracts for police, fire, and paramedic services, all amid increased demand for services citywide as our population has grown. Now, some have been critical of staff salaries and raises, so let's review the timeline of the past year and a half or so since I started as city manager. I began in March of last year. At that time, MOU negotiations between the city and the Employees Association were well underway. On May 23rd, just 2 months after starting on the job, I called for a special city council meeting that we held at the YPAC to raise the red flag on our budget looming crisis, right? That crisis was news to a lot of people. We have gone out of our way to be transparent about the numbers. I'd say more transparent than the city had been in the past. In June, this council approved the current MOU with the Employees Association and the budget. As part of that discussion and part of the discussion at the special meeting in May, staff presented to the city council and the community the fact that we were running a deficit, had been for years, and the problem was getting worse. We expressed that we were not in crisis to the extent that we were out of money, but that we were deficit spending and that we would have to solve the problem, or long-term, we would be in crisis and run out of money. The question posed to the council at that time was, what course of action do you want to take at this point? Do you want to slam on the brakes, start cutting now, or do you want to maintain service levels for the next couple of fiscal years, for the next couple of budget cycles, while we focus on the long-term solution to the problem? The direction of the council was very clear: maintain service levels and let's start talking about the long-term fix. And that's what we've done. Some in the community have said that salaries here at the city are exorbitant. And I suppose that we could have a philosophical discussion about the value of public employees, how much public employees should be paid. But the reality is, if we want qualified people serving this community, then we have to set pay and benefits that are in line with industry standards. We have to be willing to compete. At council direction, we're currently under the process of doing a class and comp study. The results should be with us soon, the next couple of months. And those results will inform our next negotiations with the Employees Association. But we've had some conversations with the firm, and initial indications are that while there are some positions that are currently higher than industry average, and there are some positions that are currently lower than industry average, by and large, we seem to be right there in the average range in the industry. But let's be clear. City staff did not cause this problem, and staffing costs are not the problem. The net cost of all city staffing is only 9% of our budget. Let me repeat that. The net cost of all city staffing is only 9% of our budget. In most cities, if you get it down to 20%, you're doing great. This city runs incredibly lean. Most staff members wear multiple hats. This staff works hard serving this community. Our directors and managers don't just oversee people, they are working directors and working managers. Frankly, I think it is shameful that, for political purposes, some in the community have targeted staff. It's okay to question, and healthy to question, and even criticize elected leaders for policy decisions made. But to viciously attack staff is not okay. You're talking about people's livelihoods here, how they take care of their families. Staff works to execute the policy direction of the city council. Whatever financial issues the city is facing, the staff are not to blame. Yucaipa is blessed with talented, dedicated staff, an unusually high percentage of which also live here in Yucaipa and are invested in the betterment of our community. That is not the case in many government organizations, and it is something we should not take for granted. It is something we could easily lose if staff are mistreated. We're going to need to rely heavily on this staff as we lead the city to financial recovery. Now, while you can criticize any one staffing change or salary, in reality, staffing levels and salaries are not the problem. And I would hate to see the talented, hardworking staff of this city take the fall for the decisions that were made over the past 15 years and the market forces, such as inflation, that led us to this place. The bottom line is the budget cannot be balanced through cuts to staffing and/or salaries. There is simply not enough meat on the bone there. If we are to balance the budget through cuts alone without significant additional revenue streams, there is simply no way to get there without deep cuts to public safety. After all, public safety is the majority of what the city spends its money on. That being said, Yucaipa has a revenue problem. Should the residents of Yucaipa choose not to provide additional revenue, then service levels will have to be cut. This will necessarily include reductions in the number of deputies patrolling our streets, the closure of one of our 3 fire stations, and the shuttering of many of the facilities and programs that do not achieve sufficient cost recovery, such as the swimming pool and the senior center. I want to be clear, these are not intended as threats, but the numbers are what they are. We either have the revenue to continue services at current levels, or we do not. The time for difficult decisions is now. I'd also like to comment on statements I've seen by some that criticize the city for not including staffing cuts in the options that are being considered. That is simply not the case. When you close a facility and/or eliminate a program, the cost savings primarily come from elimination of the staffing associated with that facility or program. If the senior center is closed, the savings will come mainly from reduction of staff that operate that facility. If a fire station is closed, the savings come mainly from the firefighter positions that are eliminated. So staffing cuts were absolutely included in the options presented. Further, should the community decide not to provide additional revenue, then in addition to service level and thus staffing cuts, salary reductions, perhaps in the way of the furloughs, will have to be negotiated. I just want people to understand that we cannot make cuts to staffing without impacting service levels. And I think it's human nature to be skeptical of government, especially when we see so many examples of waste at the state and federal levels. The knee-jerk reaction is to say that government needs to tighten its belt and cut back on spending. But here in Yucaipa, the problem is much more one of insufficient revenue. Yes, we can absolutely cut spending, but not without also cutting services to the community. So the question before the community is really quite simple, although not easy. Are we willing to pay a little more to keep the services we have now? If not, then okay. But I don't want anyone to be surprised when drastic cuts to services across the board have to be made. Yucaipa is a wonderful town. Our strong commitment to police and fire services makes us one of the safest cities in the region. Our investments in community services such as parks, festivals, and youth and senior programs help to build and maintain a strong sense of community. So the question really is, what kind of community do we want? What do we truly value? Are we willing to dig just a little bit deeper to maintain and protect the quality of life that we've all come to love? Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, that concludes my presentation. I believe the city attorney has some housekeeping items related to last-minute wording changes in the resolution.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, we did update the language of the ballot question on both Resolution 2024-38, 2024-39. It doesn't change the wording or the meaning of those ballot questions, but we removed the parenthetical explanation for the annual amount that's provided. And we changed the written out 1 cent to the number 1 and the cent sign, for example. This is mostly to ensure that we are in compliance with the election code regulations regarding the number of words that are authorized in the ballot question. We've also updated resolution number 2024-40, section 2. We calculated the days that the registrar of voters required for the rebuttal arguments and noted that the deadline was on a Friday. As City Hall is closed on Friday, we've inserted language authorizing the city clerk to accept those rebuttal arguments electronically. And we can get the hard copy the following Monday. But we did want to note that change. And then lastly, on resolution 2024-42, if the city council does get to discussing the language of that resolution, in particular cuts to the sheriff's contract, I've already discussed it with Councilmember Thorpe, but my recommendation would be to hold the vote and discussion on that resolution separately so that Councilmember Thorpe can state his recusal and leave the dais. Thank you.
All right. Is there any questions from the staff?
No.
I have some things I'd like to go over, but do we have public comment?
We do have public comment.
Okay.
I'll save
I'm
mine
sorry.
for after that.
Okay, we'll start with Patisse Huntington, followed by Dr. Hanso Wong.
Mayor Pro Tem and council members, my name is Patisse Huntington, and I am a resident of Yucaipa for going on 20 years now. Firstly, I want to thank you for your effort to engage the Yucaipa residents in addressing this enormous deficit that our city is confronting. Outreach is crucial, especially in light of the lack of confidence and the distrust towards our government, and any government for that matter. The attendance at the special city council meeting was dismal, and I was disappointed that so few showed up, because I believe that information is the key to understanding any issue at its fullest. And to those who did not attend, you missed a great opportunity to become better informed on the crisis that we're facing as a community. And secondly, although it pains me greatly to admit this, After carefully reviewing the list of potential financial solutions suggested by the city and doing a whole lot of research on the subject and trying to educate myself on how a city works, I have very, very reluctantly come to the conclusion that increasing the sales tax may be the most viable path to restoring Yucaipa's financial fitness. Unlike targeting specific groups, children, teens, seniors, utility users, essential services, raising the sales tax spreads the financial burden across all residents of Yucaipa and the visitors who contribute to our economy by shopping and dining here. So perhaps a combination of raising the sales tax by a smaller percentage along with minimized reductions to city services and recreations, and city may not like this, but possibly putting a hold on the raise in salary and benefits for city employees might be a solution temporarily. Asking certain segments of our community to make sacrifices to alleviate the deficit should apply equally to everyone, city employees as well. This would demonstrate a shared commitment to fiscal responsibility, fairness, and a sign of good faith. I hate taxes. We all do. An increase in sales tax is going to affect my pocketbook, and I will suffer the increased costs just like everybody in this room, you and all of the residents as well. I will have to revise my personal budget with cutbacks and work much longer than I had intended and hoped, because I'm probably older than a lot of you sitting at this dais right now. But I believe some sort of increase in the sales tax is a necessary evil in order to retain our Yucaipa services and our lifestyle. I love this city and I don't want to see taxes, but I believe it's the only way we're going to survive this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hanson Wong, followed by Mr. George Sardison.
It's a difficult problem we're facing now. And the end result might be that sales tax is what bails us out. And one of the council members stated that the numbers coming from the staff is a small number, and a comment made by our city manager that they work very hard to do what they do. But the concerning thing, you can raise the tax, you can help the effort, but the criticism of the infrastructure building and then the revenue will come has seen some problems in the past, and it's brought us some problems. But again, why is it then that we don't look at the infrastructures that is causing some of the problems and find a better solution or way of dealing with it? Why is it that we spend money and time, staff time, on a project that might not bring us revenue for 5 years, 10 years, possibly 20 years, yet we spent the time and effort to do it all year long? Secondly, why is it at a proposal at the Planning Commission meeting that looking at revenue of large lot sizes, do we look at warehouses that we say, oh, we hope that it becomes a point of sales to bring us revenue? We cannot deal with hope at a time of poor revenue. We have to deal with point of sales that will bring us revenue now and bring us revenue throughout the years. Otherwise, we're just going to add the deficit and problem. So we look at YPAC and say, oh, it's a problem. We're not able to bring in revenue. Then why is it that we're willing to look at 80 acres as an entertainment facility and look at it to bring us additional revenues when we can't even handle the revenues of the YPAC? It seems to me that we need to be more focused on our priority, which is bringing our budget to bear, and not to things that might do this or hope that it does this. So please, let's have a little more thought and focus on what will bring us revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
Howard Sardison, 12451 Custer Street, District 4 of the city of Yucaipa. 47-year resident, by the way. I know there might be a little replay from last Monday night. It's kind of hard to follow that presentation by the consultant, very thorough, I must admit. However, I just want to repeat that this outreach, this blacked out advertisement in the News Mirror for last Monday's meeting was woefully inadequate. I know I reminded you of that last week, and I'll hold the what I call the lack of public information officer responsible for that. And I would hope that you would all see to it that future notifications to the residents, especially something as important as this, is of a better quality, more transparent. We use the word transparent, and this is not transparent. It's hardly readable. A couple questions, maybe they can be answered while I'm here. It's so important. Is the time frame for the November ballot, are we in a certain time frame to get this on the November ballot at the current time? I'll wait for an answer after I walk away. Can Measure I tax be added on top of a new city tax? We talk about Measure I might get, onto our local tax base before we're able to do something. My question would be, can that still be added on top of a new city sales tax? I was not a recipient of the survey. I did have one family member and another friend that did it by texting. It was a little difficult to follow through on that. I'll just have to take the word of the consultant that they were able to decipher a lot of that, because there was a lot of information that was provided on those surveys. And then, as you know from when I spoke last week, when I mentioned about my trip to Duarte last Tuesday for an event, that I was going to have to pay a 10.25 sales tax on our luncheon. And I do spend a bit of time in Los Angeles County, primarily in Duarte and Pasadena, and all of those communities are in the 10% tax bracket for sales tax. I think a penny a dollar is not too much to ask of anybody. And I would urge the council to approach this and do the minimum sales tax increase of 1%, and that'll allow the city to continue to work through the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, would you like me to address Mr.
Yes,
Sarrison's
could you
questions?
please?
Yes, happy to. So yes, we're in a tight time frame for the measure. We have until, I think the latest date that any jurisdiction can vote to add something to the ballot is August 7th, I believe, August 9th. We have only one meeting next month. We knew ahead of time that one of the members of the council would not be attending that meeting. We thought we would have all five here tonight. Ended up not being the case at the last minute because of work commitments. So we are under a time frame there. Can a Measure I increase be added on top of a city sales tax? Well, the cap being 9.25% here in San Bernardino County, if we were to implement a 1.5% measure, that would reach the cap of 9.25%. Then any subsequent measures, such as Measure I, an expansion of Measure I, could not be added on under current law. If the council were to adopt a 1% measure, then there would still be 0.5% of cap to go. So let's say Measure I was a full 1 cent increase, only half of that could be tacked on. LA County's cap is 10.25% because of special legislation in Sacramento that adopted a higher cap for cities in LA County. So that's why you see LA County cities often have the 10.25% rate.
Thank you.
We have no more public comments.
Any comments on the staff? Mr. Duncan?
What's that?
Any comments from the staff? Mr. Duncan?
I do.
Okay.
But before I start, though, I did this publicly, so I need to correct it publicly. Earlier, you made a comment, you had an opinion. You're entitled to that. I responded unprofessionally. I'm sorry. I apologize.
You didn't have to do that, did you?
I had to do that because I'm the one, I had to own my responsibility for what I do, so I need to get that done before I forget about it. So, and I apologize to all you. First thing I would like to talk about with the initiative is that if we vote this through to put it on the ballot, I think it is crucial that we do the education, but we also look at the title here. And when it starts out, it talks about public safety. It does mention essential items in the title, but it seems like because the title is long, that people will probably overlook that to some degree, and they think it's gonna only be public safety things. It could be sidewalks, it could be things in the park, there could be other things that that money goes to, so we need to make sure we're transparent with that. Because it's not going to a dedicated fund, I think we need to make sure our education is very open and transparent so we can explain it, so they understand what they're doing when they go to vote. Like I mentioned to you before, one of our previous conversations, city manager, sometimes we have to work harder than others, and I think we're gonna have to work harder for this because of the distrust, and it having been out here before, and no matter what the decisions were to educate or put information out there, there was a belief in the community that I heard that just felt like the city was not being either transparent or honest with what was going on. Whether that was the case or not, that was the perception. So I think we have to work really hard about working on the perception. I would have to agree, I think we're gonna do it, that we look at the minimum, the 1% versus the 1.5. I think we also should probably separate out the vote for putting it on a ballot for the voters to vote on for November from the other resolutions, and here's why. The other resolutions tells us is exactly, we're trying to make decisions on how we're gonna spend the money, having an oversight committee. If it doesn't go through, how we're gonna do our cuts. This election year, you have potentially 4 seats open. You're gonna have, or people running. So you've got Justin, the mayor, myself, Bobby Duncan, and if the recall goes through, Matt Garner. So potentially, you could have a majority. And if something were to happen on the vote, and we all have 4 new people in here, we are tying the hands of the future city council as to how they can work through this budget if we make a decision now. I think we can make a decision now on whether or not we put it on the budget, on the ballot. But as far as how we handle that later, I think we're handcuffing our future council, depending on whoever it may be. There may not be any change, but if there is, we're not considering that, I don't think. So, those are my thoughts.
I'm not sure I understand what you just said. So, in other words, if we decide to go 1%, and then we agree to 2, 3, and 4, there's a committee to watch over the spending or how that money is used, and then that money is to be directed toward public safety specifically, or at least to make sure we don't fall behind in public safety, because I agree that public safety is priority 1 in every city. But how would our decision tonight tie the hands of future council members?
So if you look, we have 4 resolutions, and one of them is that if the initiative does not go through, then that we are voting that cuts would go into effect. And those are all the cuts that the city manager just listed. He listed a whole bunch of bullet points of things that it could have an effect on.
You mean
So-
resolution number 4, or?
42, I believe it is.
Yeah, 202,
Councilmembers?
442.
So,
To Councilmember Thorpe's point, staff is actually recommending that you consider the resolution separately as well for other reasons, including the fact that we have a recusal on one, and the voting requirements are separate between 1 and 2, and then 3. So our recommendation would be that you consider the tax measure resolution itself. So either 38, which is the 1 cent, or 39, which is the 1.5, pick one, and 40, which is simply about the rules for the arguments. We recommend that you consider that as one motion, that you consider 41, which is the discussion on future allocations, as a separate item, And then 42 finally is a separate item.
I'm okay with that, and I would have to recuse myself on 42, correct? Completely?
Yes, from the portion related to the sheriff's department. Yes,
And that's under 42?
that's under 42.
Okay.
And if I may, to speak to your comments on the ballot language, we have a representative from the Lou Edwards Group with us, who is the consulting firm we've used as we've gone through this process to think about a potential sales tax measure. They'd like to speak on that.
Hello. Hello, council members. I am here joining my colleague, Dr. Richard Bernard from FM3. For those who have not met me, my name is Jennifer Longley. I'm senior consultant with the Lou Edwards Group and was very privileged to work with Dr. Bernard and the city team in crafting this outreach question and strategy. I do want to flag for the council member that suggested changes that if any changes to the 75-word ballot language as tested would be made, we cannot stand behind the veracity of the results as presented today. In other communities, we have seen viability swing as much as 7 to 10 points on the change of just 1 or 2 words. So I do want to flag that for the team, and our recommendation would be whether it is the 1 cent version, which our consulting teams recommend, or the 1.5% version, that you do retain the ballot language as was tested. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have, along with Dr. Bernard.
There's an incredible amount of strategy and science really that goes into the framing and legal aspects as well to the framing of those ballot statements.
I appreciate the explanation. I guess my error was I wasn't trying to change the verbiage for the ballot. I'm talking about education down the road as far as how we are projecting our information out to the public.
Yes.
Making sure they understand that it's more than just
Yes.
the public safety. There are other things that it could be used for, and we need to be transparent about that, not about the verbiage for the ballot.
Fantastic, and I could not agree with you more.
Absolutely, agree, yes.
Councilmember, the education campaign, the educational efforts are highly regulated. So we will ensure that we're not putting out anything that would be considered misleading to the public in that regard.
All right, thank you. So my motion would be then the 1%, and then voting on the other resolution for the arguments and rebuttals. So what is that?
That's resolution 2024-38 and 2024-40.
40? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is there going to be a committee to watch where this money is going to be going?
Yes, the resolution calls for the establishment of an oversight committee, yeah.
Okay, and the money's going to go to, public safety, correct?
Well, it is a general tax, but knowing that public safety is the bulk of what we spend money on here, and the public has clearly indicated to us that it is the top priority not to cut public safety. We do address that in resolution 2021-41, which indicates this council's intention to spend the revenue from a sales tax measure to ensure no cuts to public safety.
Good enough.
So did you make a motion to approve this? I know, I heard 1%, and I agree with that, but as far as like item number 4 here, did you make a change to that, or?
So I can't vote on 4. I have to recuse myself of 4 because
you
it
have to-
deals
okay,
with the sheriff's department in that language, so I can't talk to that. And my motion was for 1, which is the 1%, so I think that's 38. And then the other resolution of 40 to accept the arguments and rebuttals requirements for the ROV. So that'd be 1 and 2 items.
We're going to go through line by line, right?
Yes,
Right.
Councilmember.
38, 39, 40. Okay.
Yes, so the recommendation from the city attorney is that you take those individual items individually, and so this would be the first step.
Right. The one thing about, I run a large construction company, and we burn through probably about 17,000 gallons of diesel fuel a day. And our fuel company is telling me that it was, I think 4 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, that we were paying $1.3 trillion in fuel tax alone. and now it's like 800 million. So Sacramento's coming after us. Every little town, every place that they can, and they're gonna get their money somehow. And I think that the tax, I'd like to see the 1.5, but that's my own opinion. 1% would be great, but I think that it's coming. They're coming after us, and I think that right now, I think it's on the measure coming up. I think it's a 50% or a 50-cent another gas tax or fuel tax. I can't remember. That's coming to try to, cut that deficit that they're doing right now. Is it 51%? Yeah. So they're coming after us pretty hard. So if we get our first punch in first, I think it'd be great on our end of it. But I'd still like to maybe have an open meeting again to get educated, to get the city educated on what's going on and stuff. I know that we can't
Advocate.
Yeah, we can't advocate for the tax, but we can educate.
And we can absolutely do that, yeah.
So if we can do that, just to make sure that the public knows what's going on and what Sacramento's what's coming. I think once everybody gets educated and stuff, I think it'll be a lot easier for all of us.
And we can make sure that the advertisement of the News Mirror is in full color.
Right. So on that, we'll go to item number 38.
So we currently have a motion from Councilman Thorpe right now to approve resolutions number 2024-38 and 2024-40.
I'll second.
And then if we can do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Councilmember Garner,
Yes.
Councilmember Thorpe,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
Yes.
Motion carried.
And
Okay, next we're going to move on. Before you have item number 3, which is resolution number 2024-41. And this is stating its intention to expend the proceeds of the transaction and sales use tax to prevent cuts to public safety services.
I move approval.
I'll second it.
Roll call?
We have a
Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Councilmember Garner,
Yes.
Councilmember Thorpe,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
yes.
Motion carried.
So for the fourth item, resolution number 2024-42, the reason this one is so important in staff's eyes and in the eyes of the consultant is that the community really has a significant choice to make here, right? And we don't want to be vague about what that choice is. We want the community to understand clearly on the front end what the choice is, so there are no surprises on the back end. We can't advocate, but we can be clear about the facts and what the choices are. So in my mind, it's only fair to be clear on the front end what the intention is, what the choice is. It is, in my mind, not only what's fair, but it's also a key component of our strategy for community outreach and education as well. So staff recommends strongly that the council adopt resolution 2024-42.
Do we have a motion?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. You gonna roll call?
Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Councilmember Garner,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right. Item number 16, it's for a public hearing. We got a missing council member.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, technically you are now in recess for lack of a quorum until he returns, so I'd recommend sitting tight. And they're back.
All right, item number 16. It's a public hearing for item number 16. The time is 8:08. We'll call for Anna to.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good evening, members of the City Council. Item 16 for your consideration tonight is our annual public hearing to set the solid waste rates for the upcoming fiscal year, requesting the County of San Bernardino to place collection of costs for single-family residential on the property tax rolls pursuant to Chapter 8.28 of the Yucaipa Municipal Code, and authorizing the city manager to execute a contract amendment to the franchise agreement with Yucaipa Disposal. The adopted rate-setting procedures are identified, in Section 17C of the franchise agreement. This year, there is a notable difference in the calculation of rates, as the largest component of the increase is due to a request on behalf of city staff to increase that franchise fee. Franchise fees are imposed by the city on the hauler for the exclusive rights to haul trash in the city of Yucaipa. The revenue from the fee collected is used to compensate the city for the economic impacts associated with that service, such as wear and tear on city streets. When the agreement was established in 1993, the franchise fee was set at 7% of the operator pickup fee, with a scheduled increase of 1% per year. In 1996, the franchise fee reached 10% and has remained unchanged since. It's common for cities to review their franchise fees on a regular basis to evaluate the need to adjust. Over the last several months, city staff has worked with Yucaipa Disposal to negotiate the franchise fee. By increasing the franchise fee to 20% of the total rate, the city is expected to receive an additional $2.2 million in revenue, which is critical as the city faces a multi-million-dollar budget deficit. Yucaipa Disposal has been a great partner to the city and offered to forego the portion of the increase that's paid directly to them in an effort to reduce this year's increase to the residents. In addition to the adjusted franchise fee, the agreement will be amended to include language regarding program requirements of SB 1383 as required by CalRecycle. This section will delineate the roles and responsibilities of the hauler and the city. On April 15th, the Solid Waste Committee, along with city staff, met with representatives from our solid waste hauler, Burtec Waste Industries, to discuss the increases to the various rates charged for their services. The recommendation from the committee was to approve the various rates as outlined in Exhibit A. It's important to note that the city followed the Prop 218 process for the public hearing. Notices were mailed to the residents 45 days prior to this hearing, and as of the start of this hearing, the city clerk's office has received 16 protests. With us tonight to present the annual report for 2023 is Burtec Vice President Richard Nino, who will also be available to answer any questions.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, City staff, and ladies and gentlemen of the public. Richard Nino with Burtec Waste Industries here to provide the annual report, as well as the various factors impacting this year's rate review proposal. This year's report, I want to give a few highlights of what took place in 2023. You all may recall the substantive change to the programming, which included food waste be collected not only in the residential sector, but also in the commercial sector. The food waste recycling and recovery program was implemented starting in 2022 and proceeded to 2023. Since I'm touching on that subject, I would like to highlight a very important program element, and that is a reminder to not dispose of glass or trash in the green organics barrel. It is limited only for landscape or green waste debris, as well as bagged food waste. No bottles and cans, no glass jars, no glass bottles, no hoses, no other recyclables, only that organic waste. The program has been going well. You will see that our organic tonnages were up in 2023 by approximately 1,000 tons, which brings the total to over 12,000 tons of organic waste that was diverted from the landfill, collected separately and processed into compost, mulch, and some of the material was also used as a food slurry to create gas through an anaerobic digestion process to create electricity and power. Recyclable revenues in 2023 were slightly down, about 27%, So all of the blue barrel material, primarily the fiber content material such as paper, cardboard, and the like, declined by approximately 27%. Commercial recycling programs continued to expand in 2023 as we met with small generators, low volume generators, and developed a program that best suited their needs, as well as trying to remain sensitive to any waiver or exemption opportunities that some of Yucaipa's businesses may qualify for. We collaborated with city staff to that endeavor to actually be able to waive hundreds of commercial businesses that were not forced to start an organics recycling program, including food waste. To give you an example, that was those businesses that really don't generate a lot of food waste, such as upholstery shops, accounting office, administrative services, and things of that nature. Not much to recycle from an accounting office, as you can imagine, as it relates to food waste. Bulky items, another popular service that residents took advantage of this past year. We received almost 33,400 requests for bulky item collections from our residents here in Yucaipa. That was approximately 300 more than the year prior. As a reminder to residents, bulky item collections are available at no additional charge to residents who would like to dispose and discard of large items that would otherwise not fit in their container or barrels. That would include things like furniture, appliances, and things of that nature that will not fit in your barrels. Lastly, we have a very robust sharps and lancets recycling program. It is a waste item that is not allowed to be disposed of in the trash containers that are provided by Burtec. There is a drop-off location in front of the Sheriff's Department here at the City Square. And through that initiative, we've been able to increase the amount of sharps and lancets that would otherwise have gone through either the disposal or recycling process and recovered a total of 1,260 pounds of sharps. This year's annual rate review was summarized by Ms. Salceda, and I will touch on a few additional details that impact this year's rate review. The adjustment factors are as follows, which include adjustments by CPI. This year's CPI came in at 3.48%. By contract, we can only adopt 90% of that CPI. In this year, it's 3.13%. And as mentioned earlier, in order to mitigate some of the potential cost impacts to residents as they related to the adjustment or change in the franchise fee, Yucaipa Disposal, aka Burtec, opted to not include a CPI adjustment on the residential rates. That's all of the barrel services that are predominantly subscribed to by Yucaipa residents. The other cost element would be trash disposal costs at the landfill, organics, as well as recyclables. In addition, there are program fees related to the organics recycling, Senate Bill 1383, and the other requirements through prior legislation, and there is an element for that in the rates. Lastly, the franchise fee is mentioned here as the final bullet point. As mentioned, the current franchise fee of 10% has been in place since 1996. It has not been changed or moved, and there are many cities over the years that have taken the opportunity to adjust this CPI variable from up to as much as 20% in other communities. We've seen it up to 18, 20%, and the like. I want to touch on a little of those disposal and processing tip fees that I mentioned earlier. You'll see that the trash tip fee remains unchanged. The organics tip fee increased by about just shy of $3 per ton to $89.57 per ton. And the residential recycling increased from $60.77 per ton to $73.51 per ton. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, because of the recovery value of the materials and the market declines that we've experienced in the prior year. What do these rate increases mean to the residents? Well, in this table before you, you'll see what the current rates are, as well as what the proposed 2024 amounts would be, which are roughly in that 20% range, or 22.1% specifically. and the various increases for the respective sizes. The proposed amounts are those that were selected by the ad hoc committee, which essentially included a subsidy program such that all of the residential rates would be impacted by the same percentage, in this case, the 22.1%. On the commercial side, we've have in this slide a example of some of the most common service levels, which include a 3-yard trash bin, a 60-gallon barrel for food waste, a 3-yard trash bin for multifamily customers, and the 60-gallon multifamily barrel for organics material. That includes food and green for the multifamily sector. You'll see that those increases range from as low as 12.9% to as high as 20.5%. And again, the franchise fee is included as the major component for this year's commercial rate adjustment factor. Our 1383 initiatives continue and are ongoing. Not only does the program require implementation, but it requires ongoing record keeping, monitoring, and compliance tracking. Some residents and businesses have received notifications about the annual contamination review, or route review that was done. That was completed here in Yucaipa successfully. And we've seen that through that feedback that we provide residents, we're starting to make more of an impact on the amount of food waste that we're seeing in the organics barrel. So we applaud residents' efforts and encourage all residents and businesses to continue maximizing those efforts so that we can further improve our recovery and diversion of those organics from the landfill. The balance of the bullet points highlight all of those ongoing measures, but I won't bore you with those details, that we've gone over them in great detail over prior years. At this point, I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
I don't have any questions.
I do. This is my topic. He's probably scared. No. So this year, you're not going to do an increase on the barrels?
No CPI adjustment for the barrels, that's correct.
And, historically speaking, is that something that takes place every year?
Yes, although there have been 3 instances over the years that we did forego a CPI adjustment. That was in 2015, 2021, and again, we're proposing that here in 2024.
So this would be the 3rd?
Yes.
So we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see what's coming down the road. So if history were to repeat itself this time next year, we'll probably be looking at some sort of CPI increase.
Generally speaking, based on what we've seen in CPI figures over the past years, yes.
Okay. I have additional questions, but they're probably for staff. So I don't know, do I do that? You want me to do that now, or do you want me to do that after public comment?
I would say if we can continue with the process, go through public comments, close the public hearing, and then you can enter into council discussion.
Thank you.
Did I have it? Okay. Mr. Gardner.
Yeah, I have one question for, what's his name?
Richard.
Rich. I had a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Now, how do you dispose of your dog poo? You might laugh, but people ask me, does it go in the green? Does it go in the black? Do you bag it? I mean, how are you supposed to dispose of dog poo?
Good question. That, although it is organic, it is not intended to go in your green organics barrel. It should go into the black trash can, the black or beige trash can. It is not recyclable, you can't process that.
Got it. That's it.
All right. We're all good.
We have no public comments on this item.
No public comments. No application for rebuttal. We're going to close the public hearing. This time, it's at 8:22. Now we have council discussion.
Do you have anything?
What was that?
Council discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I've got a couple questions for the city manager, and I'm doing this because I want the public to know, because I didn't know till I started asking these questions, and in the past, I've gotten kind of passionate about this topic. Can you explain, city manager, a little bit about the Evergreen agreement or contract?
Yes.
We spoke about it briefly a little bit today, about how that works, when it opens back up, if we declare we want to go to RFP, what that entails.
Yes.
Timeframes?
Happy to. So the contract between the city and Burtec is what you might call an evergreen contract, which is very common and standard in the waste hauling industry. The current contract between the city and Burtec was put into place and approved by the city council in 2019. It was essentially a 20-year contract, but it is evergreen, which means every year it automatically gets extended for another year. Now, for the first 10 years of that 20-year contract, we're completely locked in and cannot give notice that we want to go out to RFP. At any point after the 10-year, the first 10 years, we can give notice, at which time, from the time we give notice, a 10-year clock begins ticking. At the end of that 10-year clock, we can go out to RFP and potentially award a new contract. That's generally, essentially how this particular contract is structured, and that's more or less the meaning of evergreen, is that it extends automatically unless the city council takes action to notify the vendor that we wish to not extend.
And Councilor Hart, I just wanted to add that that is very common when it comes to solid waste franchise agreements, simply based on the massive amount of investment into infrastructure required of any franchisee who is going to meet the incredibly high regulatory requirements of operating a solid waste franchise in the state of California. You see the amendments to our franchise agreement to incorporate some of the most recent new regulatory requirements coming from the state. So I actually had a discussion with a member of the public about the term of the agreement before the meeting started. And when you look at the high cost that is necessary to provide the service at the level required of the state, that explains the need for a longer term.
Yeah. Let me also mention too, in relation to the contract, because we're locked in for such a long period of time, Burtec was under no obligation to reopen the contract to allow for an adjustment of the franchise fee, right? The contract does allow for them to have an annual adjustment up to CPI. The contract gives them that by right. Anything annually above CPI requires additional approval from the city council. But they're under no obligation to work with us on adjusting the franchise fee, which is what, the revenue that flows to the city. The franchise fee was established in this agreement. Initially, the first 3 years, it ramped up to where it is today at 10%, but it's been at 10% since 1996. And the industry has changed a lot. Standards have changed a lot since 1996. 10% is low. It's on the low end. Some cities are already where we're going at 20%. Others are heading in that direction. I believe that's where the industry is going. So I want to say that Burtec has been very gracious. When we came to them, it would have been very easy for them to say, yeah, no, we don't see a benefit to us to reopening that. That's going to result in cost increases to the customer. We'll take heat for that. We're just not comfortable with that. But instead, they immediately understood the financial challenges we're facing and were willing to work with us on that, and then go the extra step and say that they were willing to forego their CPI increase this year, which is revenue that would flow to them and not to the city. So I just want to thank Burtec for being such a good partner and being so flexible and understanding the financial predicament we're in and being willing to help us, because this change will bring in an additional $2.2 million of revenue for the city. It is the second largest piece of the puzzle to fixing the budget deficit. The first being that sales tax measure, which would bring in $6 million. This $2.2 million is the second biggest piece of that puzzle. It's critical. If we get those two pieces, we can, you know, put the other pieces of the puzzle in place to get where we need to be without cuts to public safety and other services. Without both of these pieces of the puzzle, we can't get there without any cuts. So it means a lot that Burtech saw the predicament that we were in, and was willing to open up that contract and help us out.
Thank you. And one last question. You kind of touched on, actually, I think the attorney touched on it. Because of the infrastructure and what it takes to do trash hauling and all the things that are in place with that, is that why we have an evergreen agreement versus taxing the carrier for coming into the city? So rather than having evergreen, could we have a tax in place for them coming into the city to pick up the trash because of the wear and tear on the roads and all that sort of stuff?
So actually, I'm so happy you brought up the wear and tear on the roads. So the franchise fee is set to compensate the city for that damage specifically. The solid waste vehicles are oftentimes the heaviest vehicles traversing most of our local residential roads. They may be the only heavy vehicle traveling down those roads. There's no funding source for dealing with that kind of activity. So this compensates the city for that. It compensates the city for the value of individual property owners and the franchisee from using public property. So people place their bins out in the street. We normally charge utilities to utilize our streets for the operation. So this is one way of compensating the city for that. And in addition, you know, this regulatory burden, I mean, the amount of time that your city staff spends on the solid waste program here at the city, this also compensates, so it's also a form of regulatory fee to ensure that city operations, the solid waste franchise, it's paying its fair share of the city operation. So that's the justification for it. Although it is an unanswered question right now, we are currently litigating in another jurisdiction the legality of a utility tax on water, sewer, or solid waste. One of our excellent plaintiffs' attorneys who challenges fees and taxes is challenging another jurisdiction that levies a utility user tax on these services that are incident to property ownership. I'm using some very specific language that comes from the California Constitution. That is water, sewer, and solid waste, essentially. So I would caution the council from, you know, if you wanted to send a utility user tax to the ballot, to the electorate, and say, would you like to tax our utility or our utility users in lieu of a franchise fee, even if it was overwhelmingly approved, as it was in this other jurisdiction, over 70% approval originally, it still may be subject to legal challenge. That's up in the Court of Appeal down in the San Diego district. Once we find out how that turns out, I'll let you know. But the law in this area is always changing. It's constantly being challenged.
Thank you for the explanation. The reason I asked that is because when I campaigned, there was several people that were not happy about the Evergreen Agreement, the tax roll billing, some facet of one way or another. I know my household isn't necessarily thrilled with it as well. However, I'm trying to ask these questions so the public understands because they may or may not know some of these details. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
I just want to say that, and I think I made a motion to approve, but I want to say that I've been working with Richard and with Burtech for the last 12 years, and Burtech is a first-class company, a lot of integrity. It doesn't surprise me that they volunteered to help us out, and so I would say that in reference to trash haulers, that you guys are the best.
Thank you.
Good.
So how much of that goes to our roads and
as much as you allocate every year. You know, this money goes into the general fund. The general fund is oftentimes allocated to these purposes, among others. Certainly staff salaries, certainly the regulatory efforts, and then roads and maintenance as the opportunity arises. So that's an opportunity during your budget process to look at it and decide how much you're going to allocate in any given fiscal year.
so that's going to be coming up here pretty soon?
Actually happened 2 weeks ago, but we'll get to do it again in a year.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to go roll call, right?
We have a motion from Councilman Duncan. I don't know if we have a
I'll
second yet.
make a second.
Okay.
I'll do this.
All right. Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Councilmember Garner,
Yes.
Councilmember Thorpe,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right.
And I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, just for the record, we did tabulate the protests, and we did not have a majority of protests.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for missing that. All right, now to number 17. Another public hearing. Time is 8:33.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This item is also mine. This public hearing tonight is for the adoption of resolution number 2024-44, forwarding amounts remaining unpaid on the certified solid waste lien list to the County of San Bernardino for addition to the 2024-25 property tax rolls as a special assessment. The solid waste delinquent lien list attached to your staff report contains a total of 44 accounts. Public notices were published in the Yucaipa News Mirror on Friday, May 31st and June 7th, and individual notices were mailed to each delinquent account property owner on June 3rd. Property owners appearing on the list who make appropriate payments to Yucaipa Disposal prior to August 20th will have their account removed from the county 2024-25 tax roll. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from this council?
I don't have any questions, no.
No.
Any public comment?
We have no comments on this item.
So we'll close the hearing at 8:34. Council discussions on,
I move approval of item number 17.
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Are you going to do the roll call? Or
Nope, we're good to go on that one.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry. All right, another public hearing on number 18. Announce the time at 8:35. We'll call Fermin.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. This item is the annexation of tract map 16268 into the city's landscape and lighting maintenance district, number 1, as zone MM. This tract is located at the southwest corner of Wildwood Canyon Road and Holmes Street. It includes 22 lots for single-family homes. The development does include public areas and certain infrastructure that primarily benefits the 22 homes in that subdivision. That infrastructure will require ongoing maintenance and also utilities and utility costs. All residential subdivision projects are required to annex into the LLMD or to establish a homeowners association. More recently, staff has been promoting the HOA option for all new larger subdivisions. As you're aware, the city's LLMD was formed in 1991, and it provides a funding mechanism for the maintenance and the utility costs for the public areas in these zones. The developer of this tract wishes to annex into the LLMD. For this subdivision, the proposed zone for the LMD will include the maintenance of the landscaped areas, maintenance of the multi-use trail, maintenance of the drainage system and the trail fencing, and also the electric service for 4 streetlights that are proposed for the subdivision. By annexing this tract into the LMD, each of the 22 lots in the subdivision will be assessed approximately $864 per year. And consistent with Proposition 218, it is necessary for the owners of the 22 lots to vote on the annexation. A ballot was sent to the owners of the properties. And as part of the annexation process, the city must conduct a public hearing regarding the proposed assessment and then consider any and all protests against the assessment. 22 ballots were received in favor of the annexation, and the staff's recommendation before you tonight is that City Council conduct a public hearing and subsequently adopt resolution number 2024-46 approving the annexation of tract 16268 into the city's LMD. And that concludes my report.
All right. Is there any public comment?
No comments.
All right, we'll close the public hearing at 8:38. Council discussion?
I move approval.
I'll second.
We got a first from Duncan and one from John Thorpe. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Got public hearing number 19. Time is at 8:38.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. The item before you is the adoption of an update to the Community Services User Fee Schedule by Resolution number 2024-45. The Community Services Department offers programs, services, and the ability to rent city facilities and fields at competitive prices. The user fees were last increased in June of 2022, and since then, several improvements have been made to city facilities, such as flooring, roofing, and paint. In addition, the cost of maintenance services and utilities has increased, as well as CPI. As a result, staff is recommending the fees listed in Resolution 2024-45. It is important to note the user fees will be included in the citywide comprehensive user fee study to be completed later this year. This concludes my report, and I can answer any questions you may have at this time.
Any public comment?
No comments.
All right, I'll close the hearing for 19 at 8:40. Council discussion?
I'll move approval. I'll second.
Approved by Bobby Duncan, I'm sorry. And Matt Gardner for his second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Council member reports, business reports.
I don't have any business reports. I just want to say that I really have a great deal of respect for the staff that works here at City Hall. I think you guys are doing an outstanding job, and I fully support you in every way that I possibly can. I also want to say to the Sheriff's Department that I fully support your contract. I think you guys are doing an outstanding job, and I hope we never cut your contract. And to the CAL FIRE contract, I feel the same way. You guys are doing an outstanding job, so thank you all very much.
Mr. Gardner? We have some free compost coming up. I think, what's the date on that? July 20th. Come out and bring your tractor out and fill your bins. Plus, we have the firecracker run. If we can reach out to Burtech and have their mascot come out, that was a cool mascot. That would be a cool mascot. Anyways, yeah, come on out the 20th and get your free mulch. You can have your start of your winter garden, I think, right in August. You start it. But firecracker run the 4th. What time is it at?
Is that the 4th of July?
I'm sorry? 7:15.
That's the Firecracker Run, YHS, 7:15, and then the 4th of July event begins at 2 p.m. at Yucaipa High School is when the gates open. And new this year, you'll be able to sit on the turf at the high school. So.
Oh, nice. All right. City manager, any announcements?
Just a reminder that we are dark the first meeting in July. So our next meeting will be July 22nd. And I hope everyone has a very happy 4th of July.
That's what was next. She put out there. July 22nd is our next city council meeting. If that's it, the meeting's adjourned at 8:42.